Hello, and welcome to the Don't Shop on Tuesday Zoom chat. We're your hosts, Jacob Kravetz and Barrie Friedland, and today we're joined again by Stephen Eisenman. Stephen is a professor emeritus at Northwestern University and an honorary research fellow at the University of East Anglia. When we last spoke, just after Trump's election, he had just published his latest book, The Young Person's Illustrated Guide to American Fascism. Today, we'll be discussing his work as co-founder and director of strategy at the Anthropocene Alliance, which is helping communities fight back against reckless development and climate change. Thank you so much again for joining us, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I just wanted to start here in the conversation around the term Anthropocene Alliance and what it means and where it comes from, why you decided for that name for the organization.
All right. Well, we named the organization when we founded it in 2017, and I'm director of naming in Anthropocene Alliance. And at the time, the term Anthropocene was very much in the news and very much debated, and it still is. As you know, and many of your listeners will know, the word Anthropocene describes a period, an epoch in human geological history as well as political and social history, cultural history, when humans now direct natural forces, that is the meteorology, the nature, rather than them being dictated to, that is humans being determined by natural forces. So we've flipped the script as it were. We're now in control of things that never were within the control of humans, and that's why the term Anthropocene, that is the time of humans, began to be used in geological circles. Um, the uh, the term is a mouthful for lots of people, and yeah, I understood you to use the word Anthropocene, and I always say Anthropocene, whether there's no one is more correct than the other. So we now just call the group A2 to make it easier, but we did very much want from the outset to signal that we were serious about the scientific backdrop that underlies the tremendous challenges that we face, and that we saw ourselves as part of a global challenge and not simply a local one or any kind of small one that within the nation, the United States alone. It really is something that we all have to attack as a species and not simply as individuals.
I urge everyone to go to your website, and we will absolutely have a link. And you and this organization has done tremendous work, and just incredibly impressive. But now we have to look at the reality of today.
Yeah.
Trump just canceled $3.7 billion in grants for
Yeah.
the environment,
Yeah.
not to mention the destruction that the departments are doing, the states are doing. So how do we move forward? Uh, Jumping off your incredible record and incredible work, what are the next steps in today's
Yeah.
reality?
Yeah. Well, let me first backtrack a little bit and say that yes, these cuts are terrible, and to say ill-advised is an understatement. But nevertheless, we have to remember that many of these grants were for things that were only tinkering around the edges of the crisis, and none of them really addressed the need to cut carbon use and burning fossil fuels. As you will know, the United States is now the leading producer of fossil fuels in the world. That happened under Biden, or maybe it happened under Obama first, and then Biden. Obama very proudly claimed that we produced more oil under him than under his predecessor. Many of the grants were for things like carbon capture, which were a complete waste of money. So to say you've cut money that's going to go to attempts to use carbon capture in cement production doesn't really matter very much. Now, the cuts to the underlying science are profoundly important because other things that are keeping us aware of exactly what the dangers are, the melting of the Antarctic ice sheets, the rising in temperatures, the impacts of releases of methane gas, all those things, all the knowledge base that we need in order to take action has been cut. Also, there have been cuts to communities who are wishing to fight back. And that gets at kind of where we need to go next. That is, um, communities have been fighting back. The fight is something that belongs to what I would call the environmental proletariat, the people who are worst impacted by the climate change and by environmental abuse are largely working class and minority communities. So any cuts to funding to those community groups, and the Trump administration has been trying to cut those left and right, is very much to the detriment and very much undercuts the struggle against climate change. Now, I do have a sense as to what should come next, but maybe I should hold that for a moment until you have a chance to decide whether there's something else we need to do before I move on to next steps, because there is a big next step.
I just wanted to pause. I am very eager to hear about next steps, but I just wanted to pause and ask around you're saying that this fight, and I definitely agree. Your phrase around this fight belongs to the environmental proletariat, is I believe you called them. First time I've heard that particular term, but again, those most affected by the climate crisis, should be sort of leading this fight in terms of defining how we move forward. Um, do you find, as A2 is doing this work, that there is a sort of cognizant? Is there an awareness, among uh, this group, or when you interact around the linkages between the climate crisis and sort of the need to address that in terms of securing a future that is livable and has prosperity in it for themselves, or are those still separated in their minds?
Right. No, I think that people are catching on. Not just catching on, the people who are most impacted have known for years about the impacts that they've suffered and have fought against them. It's only now that we're catching on to their leadership and their understanding. To say that the working class, or to say black people or Latinos or Native Americans don't understand or aren't leaders in the climate and environmental struggles is completely wrong. They've been at the forefront of it for years. We have monthly forums where we meet with leaders. We call them leaders forums, and we have now 400 members in 55 U.S. states and territories. That is 400 member communities in 55 states and territories. And when we have these meetings, we usually have between 75 or 80 or sometimes 100 people show up. They're the most
Mhm.
active, engaged, and critical, and demanding, and angry, and motivated people you can imagine. And they speak for people in their community. They speak for hundreds and thousands of people in their own communities. So yes, there is I would call them a environmental proletariat. That is people who are workers. They own nothing but their labor power. They live month to month, as 70% of Americans do. That is, they haven't done enough money to sustain them if they lose their salary for a month or two. And this is who the working class is in the United States. And the people who are particularly the lower rung of the working class, they're the most impacted by these stressors. And they're the ones who are taking the lead. And that's what we want to help empower them to do, to give you a little taste of what I think is next.
Um, there's actually, Jacob and I have been in the progressive lane for a long time, and it's environmental racism. It's just one of the easiest communities to dump on, or not offer corrective measures. And
Right.
just a little bit of a digression. There was an article in the Guardian maybe a year ago about a cadre of very wealthy people thinking about, we reach a point of dystopia where they have to be separated and guarded, and they want to know, how do they prevent their guards from killing them? I mean, at that point they have no skills and money means nothing.
Sure.
And so if you have these refugees, they can't cook, they can't purify the water or the air, and their guards are stronger than them. They can't pay them. You can't go down a
Right.
local mall.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
if we
Right.
can't appeal to
Right.
the humanity, can we appeal to the fragility of human life?
Right. Right. Well, you're talking about the fantasy of people like Musk uh, and all the tech bro billionaires, that they're going to have some ideal life on Mars or someplace. But it reminds me that this is a future based upon a model of the past. There was a medieval slogan that was used during the peasant uprisings of the 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. And it went like this. It said, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman?" That is, in the Garden of Eden, when Adam delved, that is, he dug, and Eve spun cloth, who was the overseer? There were no overseers in the Garden of Eden. And similarly, when we're out in the future, this idealized, dreamed of, impossible future of colonies on Mars or in space, who are then going to be the people who are going to deliver the groceries? Who are the people going to hand the food on the little silver trays to the people? Who are going to fill up the cars with electricity when it comes time? All that stuff that the billionaires have other people doing for them. There'll be nobody to do that. So yes, there's no risk to the rest of us that the billionaires are going to take everything and the rest of us left behind because they need everybody to do this stuff. So that's just science fiction stuff. So I would say that isn't where our struggle is. That isn't where our concern is. They're crazy, and let them just have their own fantasies if they want. It's going to lead them to perdition. But we can fight along the terms that we know we need to fight on. And that leads me to the question about what needs to be done. And you guys on the left will remember the phrase, what is to be done, which was a phrase of Lenin in about 1900. And of course, he was thinking about the situation in Russia, which was plagued by corruption and the czars, and corruption by the emerging bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and the quiescence of the peasant class up to that point. What is to be done? We're facing that again now. What is to be done? And in some sense, we're going back to a classic progressive, even Leninist strategy. That is, what are the forces that need to be arrayed in order to do the work? Right now, the forces against the Trump attacks upon the environment and upon everything else that's livable on the planet, the forces are workers. The vast majority of the American public would fall within the category of working class. Even the upper echelons of the working class, those who have a little bit more money, who are professionals, etc., even they are vulnerable. But we need to be able to appeal to them as well as working people. We need to speak to indigenous people. We need to speak to Black people, Latinos. So minority people, barely majority white populations, all of them have to be part of a popular front against this crisis that's coming down for climate environment. It doesn't look like it's right now, but that's where you have to do the classic thing that radicals do, and that is organize. Don't moan, organize. And that's what Anthropocene Alliance is beginning to do. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an overnight thing to do. It's part of the basic stuff that all of us on the left have done in the past. When there's been any progress, whether it's the 8-hour day or Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or any of those, it has come down to us doing the work of organizing. And that's where we're at right now. And that's what Anthropocene Alliance has begun to do. It's reoriented its whole program to emphasize the organizing.
You know,
So I want to ask you about that organizing, then Barry, you can go. Just in terms of what do you think has been so far the barriers between, because that has been what the task has been the whole time, right? Is to organize enough of a popular sort of front that combines the material needs and betterment of the vast majority of people who are going to generally suffer from this from the climate crisis to affect political and systemic change. So
Right.
what have you found? I guess what have you found has been sort of the roadblocks in actually, or barriers between actually creating a durable sort of front, and what sorts of messaging or strategies have you found that have started to make progress in terms of creating some of that durability?
Right. Well, there are a number of barriers. Some of them are self goals. That is, things that we in the environmental movement are responsible for, and others are outside that. In terms of the failures of the environmental movement, I would say the big greens, the big environmental movements, have been focused most of all on raising money and on professionalizing the work that they do and perpetuating the work that they do, and not focused enough on concrete accomplishments on the ground. They've been encouraged by that in terms of getting grant support, in getting corporate support in many cases. It allows them to do that and feel as if they're successful. It's not to say that some of the big groups haven't had successes. Greenpeace obviously has. Sierra Club has had some, and increasingly recently, NRDC and its legal struggles, particularly recently, has been particularly effective. We've been allied with them in a number of struggles. So they're not entirely to be faulted, but part of it's the problem of the big greens. There's also opposition from all kinds of forces, corporate forces, government forces, publicity, media, everything that tells people that they're helpless or that if they're going to take action, the only action they can take is as consumers. So we will use paper straws instead of plastic ones. And we will have beach cleans. Beach cleans are lovely, but it's not going to change one iota the amount of plastic that's dumped into the ocean. Um, we need to do more recycling, even though most of the paper and plastic we recycle doesn't even get recycled. But it's just a drop in the bucket. So the idea that we can change things by individual action has been a detour. So we need to change that. And what I'm recognizing among our members is a hunger for actual organizing. So we have teamed up with the organizing powerhouse Acorn. You'll remember them, that they were huge community-based organization leaders in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and into the 2000s. They were attacked viciously from the right. All kinds of lies were told about them. Government funding was pulled from them. Corporate funding, that is not corporate, but foundation funding was pulled from them. They recovered and reoriented themselves internationally. And we've been working with Wade Rathke, who's a organizer on the level of a Cesar Chavez and of all the other historic organizers in the past, who really knows how to do this. Now, what we are trying to do, therefore, is organize our communities into what we call SOCs, state organizing committees. Then we also have little things called sockets. It's always space for humor in the environmental movement. These state organizing committees will consist of a number of community-based organizations who want to work together and focus on a particular grievance that they have within the state. And we're going to replicate that state by state until we have as many states covered as possible, maybe all 50, and then the 5 U.S. territories. In fact, we have a SOC in Guam. This requires, however, the work of organizers. So we have paid organizers in several of our states, but we have to start small because we need money for the organizers. And that means you have to raise money and foundations and individual supporters. It's hard to do that. And organizing takes time. Any of you guys, and I'm sure you've been on the street, done this, either political campaigns or for various causes. You knock on doors, you ring bells, you come inside, you talk to people. It takes time. Eventually you'll get there. That's what we're trying to do. It should have been done decades ago. There are other environmental groups who are beginning to do this as well. Some have been doing it for a while. We're trying to do it at scale. We're trying to collaborate with as many others as possible to really get this work done. And if we can do that, then we'll be able to have real pressure put upon politicians, businesses, corporate heads, and all that to make some real progress. Under Trump, not too likely, but we might be able to tip the scales in terms of the elections coming up by changing people's minds as to who they should support. They should support people who are going to help take action on the environment and the climate. And also in future down the road, the next administration. Under Trump, we're basically in a holding action. We're trying to hold off the worst disasters if we can, so that under new leadership, we'll be able to make some progress.
Earlier I asked the somewhat facetious question about billionaires, and you cited Greenpeace, who is now facing a fine of $660 million generated by a lawsuit by a billionaire, whose intent, he hasn't called me recently, but I presume is not only to destroy Greenpeace, but to destroy the environmental movement. So I'm very heartened by what you just described, but Jacob and I and others feel there has to be economic power, that we have to bring in some economic solidarity and heft to fight.
Right. Well, I agree with you, as you know, because we've discussed this before, and I don't want to say anything that's out of turn on the DSOT broadcast. But I'd be much more interested in very targeted boycotts. That is, when you have a particular cause, when you see a target of somebody who's really impacting the environment. We've been doing that. We're now, my wife and I, who's, by the way, the former executive director. She's now the director of development. She decided after 7 years she wants to turn over to a new person. Arif Ullah, who's a brilliant person from the Bronx, who's going to take over Anthropocene Alliance. I'm moving from being director of strategy to senior advisor, but we feel very strongly. No, I forgot what my train of thought was. What was going to be? Oh yes,
Talking about
about boycotts.
targeted.
About boycotts. Targeted boycotts. We here in we're in Norwich, England. There's been a global attack, if you will, Pacific, if you, but spending power attack on Elon Musk and Tesla. Terrific thing to do. He's pulled back from the White House. He's done enough damage, accomplished relatively little except disrupting economic activity in the United States. He's stepping back partly because of consumer boycotts of Tesla. So if there's other companies, it might be Facebook because of the cozying up between Zuckerberg and Trump. It could be any number of other companies, and if you target them and enough consumers do that, you can bring them down. You bring their stock price, their share price. You get the shareholders, stockholders angry, and you can begin to change that. So I think that boycotts, they're a classic working class organizing strategy. Strikes are as well. Strikes are difficult. We don't know exactly, people have to sacrifice their livelihoods, but all those tools have to be used because this, as you know, this is existential. And we only have a few years to get going on the right path. We're still not even on the right trajectory. So it takes until we get on that trajectory, we're nowhere, and we're going down to perdition. We're going to hell after perdition.
Can I ask Stephen,
Gotta
when
move.
you were mentioning grievances before around organizing these SOCs being organized around grievances and around sort of like specific sets of policies, can you give us an example of like a grievance that a state or a set of groups from A2 are organizing around and pushing on,
But
like
we're
what you
organizing
found has been inspiring for people?
Well, we're organizing. Again, this is still baby steps. Really, just start to hire the organizers. We have ones in Louisiana, Missouri, I think Mississippi. In Louisiana, obviously, the impacts and Mississippi impacts in Cancer Alley are tremendous, just devastating. And we have community groups in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and groups in Louisiana and New Orleans and Baton Rouge and elsewhere. And we're getting them together in these SOCs, and they're trying to decide which is the key thing they're going to take on. So whether it's air quality monitoring in Louisiana, there's just been a law passed, it's now been challenged in court. A law was passed, a nuisance law, ridiculous one, anti-free speech law, to say that you have to use a very high-tech pollution monitor to figure out how bad is the soot, which is the most terrible thing. It causes asthma, cancer, etc. It has to be a $60,000 monitor. A $3,000 monitor, which is perfectly good, is illegal to be used. You can't use it as the basis for any lawsuit. And in fact, if you used it for a lawsuit, you'd be committing a felony. You'd go to jail for it. It's obvious violation of free speech. These products are not illegal. They're not banned by any government agency, but you can't use them to even speak about what the problem you're facing. So our communities will be supporting the struggles against laws like that. Another one is being debated in West Virginia and I forget where else, one other state. So this is a case where the harms are so evident, and it's so easy for these people to come together to fight that. There's I think in Mississippi, there's a particular wood pulp manufacturer who's terribly noxious for the community surrounding it. And there's other companies like that producing wood pulp for wood pellets and for cardboard. And they emit horrible toxic fumes. And they're coming around to organize around that issue. So obviously, this is impropitious places, Mississippi, Louisiana, where there's a lot of corporate capture. But when you have dozens or hundreds and potentially thousands of people who begin to organize at the local level, and they get their local state representative and they target that person, those people are very susceptible to pressure at the local level. And it's possible, I think, to move the needle on these things if you get people organized well enough. That's what we're trying to do.
We talked to someone from Louisiana Bucket Brigade,
Right.
right down there in Cancer Alley, and this was before Trump was elected, and he was very pleased that usually they get pushed out by the big, we call them the big greens, and they finally got funding, which of course they've now lost. But Louisiana is losing more land mass than any other place on earth, or one of the most, and the higher up elected officials. I believe in boycotts. We have another successful one going on, which is Target, which was very specific because a lot of companies dropped DEI, but some Black churches got together and said, don't go there. And it's very easy not to, and it's had an effect. I just feel that we can do everything at once, that we take active and easy routes, that we need to get out, we need to talk to people, and all we're asking is just passively, just don't show up on Tuesday and then put on your shoes and go knock on your neighbor's door. I mean, add as many elements to the protest as you possibly can. But I agree, I think boycotts, and Tesla was amazing how quickly that had an impact.
Right. We did that ourselves. We called up to neighbors and friends, and we went out to the local Tesla dealer, and we stood out there. There's about 15 of us, and stood the signs up, and people are honking and honking, approval. We had a couple of people come by and said how great Elon Musk is and how wonderful it is to want to go to the moon and so and so. So what are you going to do? But most people were very supportive, and it reminds them that maybe buying a Tesla isn't so cool. I mean, their strategy just is suicidal. The people who buy Teslas are people like us, and if they alienate people like us, it's not going to be the Republicans who are going to buy the Teslas because they want Chevy Blazers, with as much emissions as possible. So they've undercut their market, and I don't see how they're going to recover it.
Oh, they won't.
Do you? I sort of wanted to ask because it's interesting with Elon Musk as someone who at least a decade ago was framing himself far more around sort of as a as part of the environmental movement, or at least adjacent to it, right? Making sort of EV cars sexy and and cool, right, to drive. And now we've sort of seen this sort of turn away from all all of that, despite still sort of having the EV flair. But with and I'm wondering, sort of, do you see, is this authoritarian swing, that has been taken, is that helping or hurting the environmental movement? Do you find that this takes oxygen away from and focus away from the environmental movement, the sort of descent into authoritarianism that we've had, or does it sharpen for people sort of that, in many ways, this sort of antagonism that the government has had, as you were saying, people of color, indigenous movements have been facing this sort of antagonism, from the start, and sort of in ignoring actually facing the climate crisis. And this sort of authoritarian turn is potentially sort of getting more people aware of the fact that what's really at stake here in the climate crisis is around who ends up getting included in the in what solving it means, and for whom, right? And that these, what have you found in that dynamic, I guess?
Alas, I must disagree. What you're describing is something that people on the left have said for years or decades, and it used to go under the slogan, exacerbate the contradictions, so that if things get worse, they'll get better. People will see more and more clearly that the old slogans would have been, the bourgeoisie is after itself. They just want to crush us workers, and the more they do it, the heavier the sledgehammer they use, the more we'll resist, the more we'll recognize it, and we'll be able to fight back. The history tells us that the worse they are, the worse it is. I mean, I remember when and you're just, Jacob, you're just a kid, but I'll remember, and Barrie, Barrie, I don't mean to say anything about your age, but we're closer in age, and we'll remember, and Nixon, will remember Reagan, I remember Kennedy even, and when Reagan was elected, we go, oh, he's so terrible, he's so awful, it's going to really, coalesce the left, we're going to make all this progress. Nah, yes, the left was coalesced to some degree, but the hammers that came down were so intense. Remember the James Watt, who was the director of the Interior under Reagan, and he did terrible destruction to forests, to national parks, and it took decades to overcome that. So whenever someone like Reagan or Bush or Trump comes in, um, we'll be knocked so far on our feet that it'll take two or three cycles, political cycles, to get back to where you were, even before you make any progress. So I would like to think that yes, the awareness is much greater, and it is true that under Obama, maybe, or under Biden, protests seem to have less energy than under Trump. That's true, and that's a we on the left ought to should slap ourselves on the upside the head about that. We should be protesting whenever there's injustice is done, regardless of who's president. But nevertheless, it's going to take a while to come back from the damage that Trump has done. All the hardworking people in the bureaucracies, um, bureaucracies are often have a bad name, but bureaucrats are usually hardworking people who are doing the stuff that people needs to get done, and they're the ones who are dispassionate. They look at the facts, they act upon them, and to clear all those people out, to destroy their careers, and to get rid of that accumulated knowledge and wisdom of decades is a terrible thing. It's going to take a long time to pull it back. So I'm afraid to say that we've got our work cut out for us, assuming we even survive the next. How long is it? 3 years still of this administration.
3.5, over 3.5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Um, I know.
My, as my
Stephen,
father used
I
to
have
say,
that sense as well, but I guess
Stephen,
I'm wondering. Sorry, Barry. Yes.
oh, I was just gonna say Stephen Dosinger made the
yeah,
point, made many points, but because of the chaos of just the insanity of what's going on every day with cruel, illegal, unconstitutional, insane, racist, corrupt things going to happen today, that issues are being pushed to the side, which supports your
yes,
your theory or your position, and that not just environmental issues, but because we have to wake up and see what horror waits us today,
yeah,
that we've got to get more people focused on the issues and just saying,
yeah,
you know, yes, this is happening and people are
right,
suing, and but don't take your eye off the ball.
right. There is one point, Jacob, that is I would agree with to what you've said. That is that the cumulative bad consequences of actions that Trump is taking, um, will damage his reputation. It already has to some degree. Um, it produces a perverse incentive on the part of people like us. It's not so much incentive, but attitude. You read the newspaper and you'll hear about the latest tariffs, and you say that Trump has stepped back on the tariffs. You go, oh, well, that's good, of course, because the tariffs are an idiotic response to the economic conditions which we face. On the other hand, the tariffs are going to cost consumers in the United States a tremendous amount of money. It's going to raise the price of everything. And at that point, they'll get mad as hell. And the Trump administration and the Republicans will just, collapse in a heap if the prices go up 10, 15, 20% for the basic goods that they buy at Walmart or Target or wherever else it may be, notwithstanding the boycott of Target. Yes, this to some degree, you feel like saying the more the better, even though the more is also the worser. I have to keep reminding myself now I'm old and retired, and we have a income from, assuming that the stock market doesn't completely tank. We have investments from my university. They produce a 401k. We're living mostly off of that. Uh, that we're relatively insulated from the worst economic damage that Trump can cause. So I have to always remind myself that even though I might say, let the tariffs happen, it'll prove his undoing. Nevertheless, there are real people out there who are going to suffer the consequences of that. There are real people who are going to lose their livelihoods, who are going to become homeless, who are going to lose their jobs. Their kids are not going to be able to, going to get sicker from the lack of Medicaid that's being cut. All those things are happening. So while in some level, I go, he's going to bring his own demise. Nevertheless, he's going to bring a lot of innocent people along with him.
Yeah, and that is always the deep concern is, how do we build towards a just future that doesn't that minimizes the pain and suffering of people along the way, that doesn't, as a prerequisite, require building from the rubble or building
Yes.
from, being knocked 10 steps back. And so I guess as we're nearing sort of the end of the conversation today, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts around what Anthropocene Alliance is doing around sort of the Illustrated Guide to Fashion, tying all these together? How, what, beyond just sort of the top level of organize, 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 what where do you look to for inspiration and for hope uh, around indications that maybe we can avoid getting knocked 10 steps back, or maybe while we could still take steps forward
Right.
while during this period, because the climate crisis, unlike many of the things that we faced, is a physics-based phenomena that doesn't really work on human timelines.
Right.
Dealing with it 10 years from
Right.
now or 3 election cycles from now is physically different and leaves
Right.
us with physically different choices
Yeah.
than dealing with it now, right?
Yeah.
And so that we don't have uh the luxury, so to speak,
Yeah.
of being able to be knocked back so
Yeah.
much. So where how do
No,
you think about
you're right. Well, I think about it in two ways. One is I think I wrote an article 2 weeks ago in Counterpunch uh, about end times.
Trumpist Maximus? Yeah.
About well, that was another one, but this was the one
Hmm.
before that. It was about thinking about what could cause, catastrophe, and there's a lot to think about there, and a lot of things that can happen. So part of me is like, prepare for the worst. Now, it won't probably impact me. You, Jacob, I'm sorry to say, you're a young guy. God knows what'll happen 40 years from now. Barrie and I, pardon me, Barrie, once again, will be dead by then, but if we're lucky. Um, so that's part of my thinking, is that, the worst is very likely. But on the other hand, people do turn things around. And I'm constantly surprised and pleased about how members of our communities are active and engaged, and they have small victories that lead up to bigger victories, which lead up to bigger victories. And you think about all the dark times in the past. Imagine if you were living in Jacob and Barrie. I don't know whether I should say that you're landsmen, but very, very possibly, given your last names. If you were living
Yes.
in if you were living in Germany or in Eastern Europe in the 1930s, it would look pretty damn bleak, and you'd have reasons to be pretty despairing. That was a bleak time. There are other times in history that have been equally despairing, but people have rallied themselves. They've defeated fascism and Nazism in the past. People have gone on to survive despite terrible. Think about indigenous communities in the United States, a terrible genocide, and yet there's more Native American people in the United States now than there ever were in history. So people do bounce back. Nature has a tremendous capacity to bounce back. I've seen it. We've seen it with our own eyes. I would say that people should go out into nature and enjoy it and look at it and see the natural cycles and see in areas that have been reclaimed. There are still victories that are to be observed in ecological restoration. So if we can get our heads around and our bodies around and begin to act on the political challenges ahead, then we can make progress and nature can recover. Climate change is already built in, a certain amount of it, but not all of it. And if we can stop things at 1.5, 1.6, 1.8 degrees, that's better than 2, better than 2.5, better than 3. And I think we can do that.
that?
How's that?
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much. There's a lot of work ahead of us, as you said. Primarily, the number one lesson is organize, organize, organize
You
people.
bet. You
Talk
bet.
to them, create human connection between each
Right.
other, and so that we can, what to just as I was wrapping up. What one thing I was thinking of is Anthropocene or Anthropocene, however one pronounces it, right, is around humans controlling the environment. And I think one of the things is we have felt perhaps while we are pushing the levers, right, and affecting the environment massively, we feel very
Right.
little in control of it. And
Right.
perhaps what your group is trying to do is, from a grassroots perspective, try to actually take some of that control, make people feel
Exactly.
actually in control of this era that we're in, rather than sort of barreling recklessly and unthinkingly towards whatever disaster will lay ahead if we don't organize
Exactly,
and work
Jacob.
together.
I agree.
Thank you
So
so much
really
for
want to
your
thank you for
and
yeah.
your insight and And Jacob has many talents, and one of them, he knows all these quotes verbatim. I know, don't mourn, organize. That's one that
Exactly.
Joe Hill.
That's
And
it.
it's very comforting to know that your organization is out there putting together the threads and the unification that we need
Right.
to fight.
Right. It's expensive. I got to tell you, if you've got some listeners out there who want to support this effort, let us know, let others know, because you need to hire organizers, and that costs money. People have to live.
So thank you so much, Stephen. We'll be sure to let everyone know and direct them to anthropocenealliance.org to give whatever they can, both in terms of time and money towards this great effort. And we want to thank you again for all the work that you do in environmental work, in raising consciousness around the fight for justice and democracy, and just for overall being a wonderful citizen of the world and taking time today. So thank you so much. And to everyone listening, until next time, don't shop on Tuesday.
Thank you.